It's on you. The date was set, the topic agreed, and now the room is full. All eyes are on you, and there is not a sound to be heard as they all await your opening words. The hours, days, weeks, or even months of preparation leading up to this moment all come down to this: your presentation. What follows for your audience will either be something they will enjoy or something that they will endure. But wait, I hear you say, I don't do any presentations. I'm not in that role or line of work. Well, allow me to let you in on a little secret. What most don't realize is that regardless of whether you are on a stage, in a boardroom, or in a coffee shop, if you open your mouth to express your thoughts, beliefs, ideas, opinions, etc., then you are presenting. You are presenting these thoughts, beliefs, ideas, and opinions to the outside world. Everybody is presenting something in some way to someone every time they communicate. It is for that reason why good presentation skills are so essential. And this could be no more important than when considering professionals and their use of business English. Great presentation skills form one of the fundamental pillars that set professionals apart from general English users. Those who have mastered these skills will always have the advantage over those who have not. So, with that in mind, welcome to Powerful Presentation Principles. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Business English Podcast, helping professionals communicate more effectively, more confidently, and with impact. With your host, Rob, from Energetic English. Let's get down to business. As I mentioned in the introduction, we are all presenting our ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and opinions externally at some point to someone. I want you to think back to the last time you communicated with someone before you listened to this. How did you do it? Verbally? In written form? Or maybe you gesticulated and did it visually? However you did it, you were still presenting your intent externally. It is happening all the time. And our audience, be it a single person or an entire arena, is absorbing our message, both what we are saying or indicating and how we are doing it. Now we have discussed this a bit more, I hope that you are a little more accepting of the idea that we are all presenting in some way each time we communicate. However, the aim of this podcast episode is not to look at such a basic definition of presenting as in our regular interactions on a daily basis, but rather our objective is to explore the much more specific definition of presenting, the sort that has even the most competent language professionals quaking in their boots, the type that reduces a well-informed specialist to a rambling wreck. We will be addressing the skill of presenting in a professional environment. Now, it is beyond the scope of this episode to discuss the tactics of all the possible variations of presenting within professional environments. These vary greatly from industry to industry, culture to culture, and for countless other reasons. More niche tactics of presenting will be covered in later podcast episodes. Our key focus is to study the principles of professional presentations. Therefore, these principles can be applied widely to almost all contexts for maximum utility and effectiveness. However, before we begin, in order to explain these principles of presenting more clearly, let us define what presenting actually means to us. So in our use case, we will define it as the method of conveying an idea or set of information to an audience. I believe this definition covers almost all the situations professionals find themselves in when they are asked to present. Now, just a quick warning, this is a beast of an episode, full of actionable advice on how to give powerful presentations. But don't worry, if you feel overwhelmed at any point, I will be pulling it all together at the end of the episode. In addition, I'll be providing a simple summary in the show notes. Right, with the intros, definitions, warnings, and context out of the way, let's get into the principles of powerful presentations. As is customary here on the Business English podcast, we like to keep things professional and well formatted. So, we have broken down these principles into 5 distinct areas. The 5 principal areas are the structure of your thought process, the structure of your presentation, the simplicity of your content, the simplicity of your delivery, and engagement. Now, at first glance, these may seem overly simplistic to you, but that is good. This will help with memory retention of these principles later. We will drill down into each one in just a moment to reveal the key points within each principle, so we can get moving on crafting a powerful presentation. But before we move on, just a little note on these 5 principles and how they are intended to help you. Number 1, the structure of your thought process. This principle is all about preparing to plan your presentation. It allows you to think correctly about how to approach your presentation and give you the opportunity to consider all the vital areas. Number 2, the structure of your presentation. This principle provides a robust and foolproof framework for you to use when presenting. Number 3, the simplicity of your content. This principle helps refine your presentation so that the information or idea you're presenting is crystal clear and understandable to your audience. Number 4, simplicity of your delivery. This principle helps optimize the flow of information between you and your audience, allowing your message to be easily absorbed. Number 5, engagement. This final principle is the icing on the cake and has the sole aim of engaging your audience. In order for your presentation to have a powerful impact upon your audience, they must be engaged. Now, I want you to keep in mind that this is not necessarily a step-by-step process, but rather guiding principles that you can use to assemble your presentation in the most optimum way. Right, let's move into the first principle, the structure of your thought process. As we've already said, this principle helps us think about our presentation and our structure correctly. Now, when planning our presentation, it is really useful to imagine it like a journey. For example, when planning a journey, we must always consider 3 important elements: the destination, the terrain, and the vehicle. The destination is quite simply our end point. The terrain is the ground or environment we must deal with and navigate to get to our destination. And the vehicle is the mode of transport we must use that is most appropriate for the terrain and that will eventually get us to our destination. I know what you're thinking, Rob. What are you talking about? Well, bear with me a second. This journey analogy is actually very useful for us when we are trying to think about our presentation. The destination is actually our why. It is the reason we are speaking to our audience, the singular point we are trying to make to them, or an action we wish them to take. It is our end result. It is the sole point of our presentation. The terrain is our audience. They will come in many shapes and sizes, different backgrounds, cultures, languages, and beliefs. An environment we must navigate if we are to be successful in reaching our destination and illustrating our point. And the vehicle, which is, of course, our presentation. It is our method of navigating our terrain, or as we have said, our audience, in order to get to our destination and illustrate our key points. So let's use this analogy now to think in a structured way about our presentation. Let's first think about our destination, or better said, what is the point of our presentation? Why are we presenting to them? What effect are we trying to have? Is it to inform them of something? Move them to act upon an idea? to create interest around a certain topic? The key takeaway here is to have a clearly defined destination or endpoint. If we are not clear on our ultimate message to our audience, our why, then our audience has no chance of understanding it. So, we must start with the end in mind and have a clearly defined output of our presentation. What is our why? Right, let's now consider our terrain, or in other words, our audience. As we've already said, our audience is our terrain that we must navigate successfully if we are to correctly illustrate our point and reach our destination. The challenge for us as presenters is that our terrain, or better said, the thoughts and beliefs of our audience, can vary incredibly from person to person. This clearly presents quite the challenge. So, what do we do? Well, just like we would study our map in preparation for a journey, the first thing is to study and understand our audience. Who are they? Are they old or young? Employed or freelance? Progressive or classic? Children or adults? Open or close-minded towards our topic, etc. The point here is that without first understanding your audience, it is impossible to select the right vehicle for the terrain. That vehicle is your presentation. You can't begin designing your presentation without first having some idea of who your audience are. You must understand your audience before beginning your presentation. And finally, in preparing for our journey, we must now think about the most appropriate vehicle now that we know about our terrain, or now you have a better idea of who is in your audience, you can now design your presentation so it is the most suitable fit for them. Knowing your audience in a little more detail will allow you to engage them much more effectively. We will cover this later in more detail in the engagement principle. So, to briefly recap this principle, planning your presentation is a lot like planning a journey. Firstly, be clear on your destination, your key output, your why. Secondly, understand the terrain you must navigate to get to your destination, i.e., study your map or your audience. Who are they? What are they about? And lastly, with an understanding of your terrain or audience, you can now select the most appropriate vehicle for the job. Our presentation can now be designed with our audience in mind. Okay. Now that we have a well-structured thought process and all the information that comes from that, we can now move on to the next principle, which is the structure of our presentation. We should, by now, be in a position where we have a good understanding of what the key output of our presentation is and a better understanding about the type of audience consuming our presentation. As we mentioned in the last principle, with these two pieces of information, we can now start to design and structure our presentation. But how do we do it? How do we start to structure our presentation? Well, as the famous saying goes, tell them what you're going to tell them it, and tell them what you just told them. In essence, the structure of your presentation should reflect that of an essay, with an introduction, body, and summary. The structure of a presentation should be no more complicated than this. Yes, of course, it is from this basic structure that many variations of presentational style and structure are born, but they all essentially boil down to this structure of introduction, body, and summary. What you choose to do in these three parts is very much up to you, but here are a few common techniques for each part. For the introduction, you could pose a question. You could quote something outrageous, or argue with a popular belief. You could answer a question, or use some sensational statistic. All these techniques are designed to do one thing: create intrigue, and therefore engage your audience. But more on this later. Okay, moving into the body of the presentation. Here you could tell a story, You could debate different sides of an argument. You could elaborate on that sensational information you used in the introduction, or offer insights and information to back up such sensational claims. The options that you have available here in the body of your presentation are only limited by your imagination. So do your research and find out what style is going to resonate best with your audience and move them towards your intended output. And so into the summary. In the summary, we can summarize the moral of that story you were telling in the body. You could highlight key points that may have been buried by a long narrative in the body. You could draw together all the information in order to answer a question, or move your audience to action. The summary is the moment at which you really need to drive your point home to your audience by creating that light bulb moment or moving them to action. The importance of a strong summary cannot be overstated. Testing and adjusting your own presentational structure is a really important process that you must go through ahead of your presentation, as you will more than likely need to fine-tune it as you see what works and what doesn't. Remember, the structure is there to benefit the audience, to help format your information and assist them in making sense of it all. A clear structure can really add power to even the most difficult presentations, because if your audience can see it clearly, then they can act on it easily. Right, with a structured thought process to produce meaningful content for your presentation, and a strong presentational structure to put the content in, we now must move to the third principle, the simplicity of your content. This principle is designed to make your content as clear as possible for your audience, so that it can easily be absorbed and acted upon. This is a vital step, as it is a mistake that is made all too often by professionals from both native and non-native backgrounds. Essentially, overcomplicating your message or information that you're presenting is an easy way to paralyze your audience. Now, of course, nobody wants to overcomplicate anything, but it can happen indirectly. For example, many presentations are filled full of impressive facts and data that may be designed to support a point. But in reality, too much of this can end up burying that key point we're trying to highlight. So be aware of how much you are putting into your presentation. Think to yourself, is all of this absolutely necessary? Does it dilute or bury my key point here? Don't overcomplicate it. The next way to simplify your content is a big one, and that is expectation management. You must manage the expectations of your audience. You must, in essence, take them by the hand and walk them through your presentation, guiding them every step of the way. But how do we create this handrail to guide them? Well, we tell them what's going to happen next. For example, how many principles of powerful presentations are there? Where are we in that process? Have we just begun? Are we about in the middle or just coming up to the finish? How do you know, even though this may be subconscious? Well, it's because I have told you. Just like the contents page at the start of a book, if you lay out what is about to happen for your audience, it will enable them to navigate it better. Informing your audience of what is about to happen allows them to keep track of what is going on, even in the most complicated of scenarios. Manage their expectations. Right, on to the fourth principle, the simplicity of your delivery. Now that we have simplified your content, making it easier for your audience to understand, we can now simplify the delivery of this content to your audience. Our main objective here is to optimize the flow of information between you and your audience so it's easier to absorb. We essentially do this in three ways. The first way is through the use of summaries. Just like I have been doing throughout this podcast episode, I have been summarizing at the end of each section to bring it neatly and clearly to a close before moving on to the next section. This helps confirm the key points in the audience's mind before adding further information on top. So, make sure you use mini summaries at the end of each section in addition to your main one at the end. Remember, summaries save speeches. The second way we can simplify the delivery of our content is through the use of our language. This might seem rather obvious, but you would be surprised how many presenters build a wall of complex grammar and vocabulary between them and their audience. The bottom line here is if your audience does not understand the point you are trying to make as a presenter, then you haven't done your job. Make it easy for them to understand your message through using simple and effective language. I do understand the tendency to want to show off your language skills whilst presenting, but you must resist the temptation. Yes, there may be an opportunity to add a little flourish here and there, but it must not interrupt the core messaging or detract from the point of your presentation. Remember that presenting is seldom about the speaker, but rather the message they are imparting to their audience. So ensure your audience gets exactly what they're expecting. Use simple, clear language to ensure your point is conveyed as powerfully as possible. And finally, the last way to ensure simple and effective delivery of your content is through speed. The speed of your delivery. That is, slow your flow. Now that expression should sound familiar, as we've touched on this before in the First Day, First Impressions podcast episode. If you haven't heard that yet, go back and listen to it when you can. But to explain this concept once again, slow your flow is a reminder to speak a little slower when presenting than you normally would. I'm sure we can all think of a time when we've been listening to someone speak and they have been racing through their speech. This could be for a whole number of reasons. Maybe they're nervous, or perhaps they believe it makes them sound more fluent if they speak quickly. Whatever the reason is, it is significantly impacting the quality of their speech. To start with, their pronunciation will be far worse in accelerated speech. There is also a lack of opportunity to think ahead about what they are saying, which could lead to forgetting a piece of vocabulary or using incorrect grammar. But most importantly, you run the risk of losing your audience. As you speed through your presentation, your audience's focus shifts. It shifts from taking the time to absorb your key message to just trying to keep up with your presentation as they fight to take in what you are trying to say. The key point here is, of course, slow down. Your audience and their understanding of your key message is the priority, not how fluent or competent you're trying to appear. So, to simplify your delivery of your presentation, firstly, you've got to make sure you're using micro summaries at the end of each section, ready to pull them together at the end. Secondly, ensure your language is simple and accessible for all. Make it easy for your audience to absorb your messaging. And finally, slow your flow. Your audience's grasp of your message is the objective, not appearing fluent. And the final principle of powerful presentations is, of course, engagement. As we have already mentioned, an engaged audience will be much more receptive to your key points and information that you're presenting. But how do we engage our audience? We need something more than just a catchy presentation title. Well, the secret sauce here, ladies and gentlemen, is quite simple. You must get your audience to care. It all begins with the introduction, where we must generate intrigue. We can do this through asking a thought-provoking question that your audience needs help answering, or perhaps a wildly controversial statement or statistic that goes against common belief. Whatever it is, it must have your audience salivating as you head out of your introduction and into the body of your presentation. And I know, some of you will say the subject of my presentation just isn't sexy enough. Well, I would encourage you to look at it again, but through the lens of your audience this time. If you are presenting on a topic, then you're more than likely more experienced than most on it, and therefore will undoubtedly have intriguing insights into this topic. Use your expertise to deliver an experience to your audience that they may not be expecting. This will, in turn, generate intrigue and perhaps a little surprise, ultimately helping to engage them. So, into the body of the presentation we go, where we must continue to keep our audience engaged. To do this, we're going to rely upon the information we uncovered with our structured thought process and preparation for the presentation. If you remember, it was with this principle we began to understand more about our audience. This assessment of your audience that you conducted now becomes more valuable than ever as we seek to keep them engaged throughout our presentation. We are now going to use the concept of hearts and heads. Hearts and heads refers to how members of your audience are most likely to be engaged. For example, some audience members may be more receptive to facts, figures, and data, and so this should be factored into your presentation. However, in the very same room, you may have individuals that are far more emotive and will respond to emotionally charged stories or interactions. From experience, I would suggest that most audiences have a good mix of both, so be sure to include all the necessary ingredients as we've discussed. And finally, into the summary. Now, at this stage of your presentation, your audience should have your key messaging and be suitably engaged through logical or emotive means. All that remains is for you to use a strong call to action. Now, a call to action has one sole purpose, and that is to direct your audience to do something. Act on your presentation. For example, download a video, sign up to a course, start skiing, stop smoking. The call to action should be relevant to your audience and be directly connected to the key messaging of your topic. It is in many cases the whole point of your presentation, to get your audience to take some sort of action. So, in short, to properly engage your audience, firstly, ensure you have an intriguing intro, one that really sucks them in and sets them up ready for your body. Secondly, in your body itself, use hearts and heads to engage your audience in an emotive or logical way. Then finally, in your summary, use a strong call to action in order to consolidate your whole presentation and bring it to a head. And there we have it, the powerful presentation principles. I told you it was going to be a beast, didn't I? But as is customary and honestly just best practice, let me quickly fly over those key principles once again just to recap them for you. So firstly, structure your thought process. This will help you plan your presentation and cover all the bases. Your presentation is a lot like a journey with its own destination, terrain, and vehicle. A good understanding of your destination and terrain will allow you to select the most appropriate vehicle for a successful journey. Secondly, structure your presentation. Adhering to the simple essay structure of introduction, body, and summary is the most effective way to execute a presentation. It provides a solid baseline for you to work from should you want to do more. Thirdly, simplify your content. We do this by avoiding overcomplicating our presentation through the use of excessive information. Stick to your core topic as much as possible. You should also manage your audience's expectations as much as possible by telling them what is about to happen, so they can keep track of what is going on at each moment. Fourthly, simplify your delivery. We do this in 3 ways. By using micro summaries at the end of each section, by keeping our language simple and clear, and finally, slowing our flow. And lastly, engaging your audience. Through the use of intriguing introductions, emotive and logical arguments and stories in our body, and decisive summaries that move our audience to action, we can engage and maintain our audience's interests throughout our presentation. With that, I will leave you with a reminder that no effective or powerful presentation is a happy accident. It is through these aforementioned principles that we are able to shape our presentations so that they impact our audience powerfully and deliver the desired effect. Good luck. This has been the Business English Podcast. Please leave a review and let us know what you think. We'll see you next time.